Welcome to the Change Physician Podcast. I'm Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, and I'm going to introduce you to part 2 of relationship awareness in episode 171. Kevin and I had a discussion about the importance of some small things and even personal examples of how being aware of certain things in relationships are critically important. This second part will help summarize at the end all of the different ideas of things to avoid, things that you can do to enhance your own personal relationships, and I hope you enjoy.
I was thinking about that article I read about, I think about how physicians, it's a mild tangent, Kevin, just bear with me, but how many times as physicians we acquire more money, we acquire more things, and we can, some people keeping up with the Joneses kind of things. But when it comes down to what really makes us happy, it's usually relationships, who you spend your time with, having something, some meaning or something important to do, and then something to look forward to. I think there's a certain part of like looking forward to future days, and I don't think that's any different in relationships specifically. And for us, it reminds me of some of the other small things that we can do in relationships is to sometimes when you schedule something, you put it on the calendar, you set a date night, or you set a little excursion to go do. Those things can help kind of liven up the relationship a little bit. And it doesn't have to be sexual. I mean, it can just be spending some quality time. For example, we went on in the middle of the pandemic, went to this outdoor animal park thing, just drove through there and like had an adventure, just creating adventures along the way. And travel has always been that for us. And I think when we travel less, you notice that there wasn't something on the calendar to look forward to. You can get into the lull of day in, day out, the monotony. I think that's an important thing to remember is that it's easy for us to go into this monotonous life and cycles that we have or habits. But if it doesn't create this, I think as humans, you just need a little bit of variety in your life. And I don't mean find another partner. I mean, like literally do things different together and create something it can be just, I don't know, scheduling a trip somewhere. It's just little things, but creating some kind of ritual where you have a date night or an adventure weekend or something of that sort it just changes it up. I don't know how else to say it. You got to change it up, but it's obviously in a lot of research that this is important, and the Gottman Institute, talks about it as well.
So kind of condense that out a little bit is what you kind of touched on. Novelty is a key, and that's important to humans as well as relationships, is a sense of novelty. Yeah. And then the other part that I was kind of going to take away thing is it may seem like a small thing, but even scheduling just a sit down time or a coffee break or your little excursions that you're doing, when you schedule something, that's important.
Yeah.
And so by scheduling it, you're actually saying to yourself as well as to your partner that this is important to me, that us are important to me. So that's the act of scheduling itself actually becomes, as long as it's something that you guys enjoy doing. If you're just like, oh, we're going to schedule the night to fight, then fighting with you is important to me. No, but it just that maybe, I can see people, well, that's such a silly little thing, but it's the act of scheduling that implies importance, that you've actually put it on the calendar, identified that this is important to me. We are important. We as a couple is important to me. And that definitely sends a potentially small message, but ultimately it's a big message to your partner.
Yeah. And don't schedule a dinner night and be on your phone the whole time. Like quality time, like face to face, or at least side to side with discussion, with connection, or just being present with each other. I think about even when Corey asked me hey, you want to go for a walk? Sometimes you need to say yes to requests. And obviously you might, depending on the number of requests and what it is, I mean, you might have to be selective based on your schedule. But I'll tell you, just going outside, I mean, when you link it with something healthy, like a walk, And you do that and you end up talking the whole time or not, depending on the situation, holding hands on the walk, or, I mean, we do that. And to me, that's we both feel good afterwards. So I think checking in with your partner and you both enjoy it, you feel good after it. And there's so many things playing into that, I'm sure physiologically too, when you're in the middle of a walk and you're talking and you're holding hands and you're getting affection and you're connected. I mean, it's just a win-win. I think about a family in our own neighborhood, the couple walks, or one of the couple walks with the dog, or one of the parents walks with the daughter. The other, you'll see 10 minutes later, the other parent walking with the son, or all four of them walking together. And I will tell you, they are religious at it. They do it almost if not, it's gotta be every day. It's just, I probably don't see them every time. But they have, and they're talking together. Like, there's just I'm not inside that house, but there's a feeling that there's such a connection amongst all of them, but they've created a ritual that's also modeling to their children that this is like healthy activity and healthy relationships, and generationally it's impacting. We didn't even talk about that, but everything that you're trying to do and all these little small things is influencing your children, whether you want to believe that or not. It's kind of that mirroring thing. So anyway, those are just that, creating some kind of ritual where you're together and have the opportunity to connect. I think that's key.
So I'm going to summarize that again because
I'm worried.
It helps me. So another small action is being present when you're present.
Mm-hmm.
So in those moments of time, and I think about that one because if you're in a busy schedule, it becomes these small. Actually, in Gottman they call them. Well, I forgot the word. It's like basically reaching out. There's a word that they used about that. When some of these small requests that people do is actually it's a God, I wish I remember the word now. But it's an attempt at connection, right? And there's two ways that you can respond to that connection. So the simple moment, maybe you're running out the house and they're saying, "Oh, have a great day," or "Let me give you a kiss before you go," and you're like, I can't do it. I'm too, I can't wait for you. That's a reach out and pop opportunity for connection. So, being present in those little teeny moments becomes a big deal. The other one is to say yes to things, not necessarily because you want to do whatever it is, but because you're saying yes to relationship, which I really like that. That's important time is you're not, there's a lot of things that you individuals that our spouses may find interesting, but if it's important to them and they ask you to participate, then you're not necessarily saying it because I love whatever it is because you love your spouse that you're opting in. Yeah. And then the last part is, which I just really enjoy, is create moments of connection, these small little moments where now you're present and you're engaging and you're accepting that invitation to correspond. Is you're creating these moments where there's potentially of deepening the connection. And these don't have to be big deals. I mean, we're talking about small things. It made me think about specifically things like little rituals that I have kind of incorporated into our life here. One of them is coffee. Like if my wife or I are in the morning coffee, like if she's going to work or I'm doing something, and I know that I will actually sit and we'll actually drink our coffee together before she leaves, even if I'm busy doing something else or whatever. We'll sit down and kind of do that. Doesn't most of the time. The other part is really super weird is that when my wife or my kids are leaving, I always try to see them at the door while they leave. And this is me being the super weird person, is I'm like, I just want you to know, because if something happens and a plane crashes into the house and kills me, that I want you to know the last moment that we had was that I was saying that I love you or whatever. Yeah. And on the other flip side is I always think about, this is like the Stoic part where they talk about, imagining death and horrible, awful things so that it makes you more resilient for the future. I'm always like, what my last moment? What if someone walks out your door and you never see him again because some horrible trauma occurs? Mm-hmm. I don't ever want to miss those moments. So these being able to create these things. And I think as I've become more aware of things like criticism, contempt, etc., I've been much more intentional about, something that may have been default because I just did it. Oh, I'm just going to see you out. Now I understand the reason why. So I'm actually much more attentive about doing these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you actually reminded me of my parents. They do the same thing. Even though we're driving off one direction, we have to go around the cul-de-sac and come back, and they're always standing right there at the door. So our last image of them is like them waving and, giving kisses goodbye and whatnot. You were saying one of those things you had distilled down, you talked about, you're saying yes to the relationship, even if it's not something that's your own personal interest. I think that to expand it even further, I think, and it's something I have to work on, is not just when they ask you to participate in something, but on your own initiative to maybe learn a little bit more about what they're doing. I'm a little guilty of that because I think I put a little bit too much on my plate. And so I feel like, don't have that space for it. But I feel like that's one area that I could extend more expression of love and reality is you can have conversations about it. Like we have such different interests that I might talk about the same thing over and over again, and that gets really boring and dull, and the same thing vice versa. So if you can kind of bridge and find one of those things that maybe wasn't your interest and show an interest or at least a better understanding of it so you can have a better conversation, maybe keep up with the headlines of something, maybe my husband's following, then it just makes it a lot more fun and enjoyable.
And you can learn something around the ways. I would call that being interested in what your partner's interested in because it's interesting to them.
Yeah.
And, so my wife and I are super, super different. Like, we talk about it quite often that we are very, very different people.
Yeah.
But I know all sorts of stuff about fiber knitting, sheep breeds, not because I'm interested in fiber knitting or sheep breeds, but she is.
Yeah.
But I find it absolutely fascinating. And it's so fun to actually participate in something. And then she gets excited and she wants to talk about it. And half the time I'm like, okay, we got to slow down and tell me what this stitch is or what the breed is. But it makes it is. It's like but I've grown because of being interested in what she is interested in. Actually, my daughter said the same thing. She's like, "Oh my God," because now we're into fiber. Like, oh, is that merino versus you want to natural fiber versus synthetic fibers when it comes to clothes and the differences and things like that. My daughter actually went thrifting this weekend and she said the same thing. So, Mom, you made me a snob about this stuff. I'm always looking at what the fiber is and whether it's natural versus synthetic. And no, but it's just something that happens because you are interested in whatever it is that your partner, spouse, parent, whatever is interested in.
Yeah. And there was something in my head. I probably should have just written it down. But like, if something's like over your head, like that's a pretty good clue that maybe you should like learn a little bit about that. Oh, this is what I was going to say about that. By trying to learn, and the big clue is if you're totally clueless about what they're talking about, maybe you should learn a little bit. But if you like to give little gifts or have thoughtful gifts, like the better you understand what they love and what they like. That's why my husband's such a great gift giver. Not that I tell him all the time, I don't need any gifts. I don't need anything, but he loves to do it. And he's such a great gift giver. I mean, even for my own mother, like better than I am. I'm like, oh my God, this is so revealing of my, things I can work on. But yeah, you can create such you're just making me think about all this right now. Not that I don't know these intuitively, but I mean, he's so good at listening and very curious and trying to understand things and really, truly, deeply wanting to understand people that he cares about, or is intrigued by, that he becomes like the best gift giver in the world. Like I don't even know how he knew the stuff that I never knew anything about stuff that he ended up helping us get for Christmas for her. Thank God. He's so great at that. But yeah, and that's why he's such a good connector, because he really listens and he is picking up on stuff you don't realize he's picking up on, which is kind of creepy, but it's good. You know?
So the last thing that I wanted to, because I jotted a note during here about one of these small things that I wanted to bring up that you had mentioned specifically, and really about Corey, but I think this is important, is focusing on the action, not the words.
Yes, that was on my list too.
Yeah, and that is so key, because it just brings me back. I hate it when people say something and then their actions don't follow through.
Yeah.
And luckily I don't see that a lot in our relationship, but I see it in a lot of different sort of other types of relationships. There's another little weird thing. I'm really interested in customer service. Like, that kind of relationship dynamic is fascinating to me.
Those Corys.
Oh, it is. Actually, I think that's a good study for most people. If you identify what good customer service is and why you are so happy with it, it can improve your other types of relationships as well. Actually, I think this is important for physicians. If you're in a state of a management role, and someone then says, "Oh, I'm sorry," or that I'm sorry you feel that way, which is a total non-apology to begin with. Yeah. But then they don't follow through. I think there's a lot of frustration, particularly in multiple different domains, is you have people who are saying that they are sorry and they understand, but their actions in no way actually demonstrate that they're sorry, they understand. Yeah. So hopefully we don't do that in our relationships, and as a profession, like if anybody's involved with like managing anybody, I find that offensive, actually. Like, because you're aware enough to verbalize it, but it's not important enough for you to do anything substantive about it. So then don't even bother bringing it up.
Right. No, that it's, I think it's, well, you got to be aware and you got to care, and not everyone has the care part. Well,
and in your own relationship, if you feel like you're apologizing all the time for something to your significant other, whoever they may be, ultimately that's going to, in some ways, you either got to look at the relationship and look what the action is, or change what your actions are to reform your actions, right? Because if the relationship's important to you and you're sitting there and just saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," you're actually not sorry, because you haven't changed.
Yep. Well, that's the dilemma, because there might be people who come to a place where there's kind of a deal breaker, in some people's lives, that, if whatever it is that other person is not changing is impacting them negatively. I mean, who knows what that is? Obviously, we're doing this whole episode because we want to help inspire people to not only be aware of the things that can really be devastating to a relationship, but being aware that sometimes the healthiest behaviors are simple, like the little things we do every day, not just planning one vacation a year, but the simple daily routines that we have are putting positives or negatives into our relationship. And you have to be very intentional and consistent with those things. And there'll be times where we kind of slip back and whatnot, but if you're not aware, then you don't even know you're slipping back. So I think that's really important. And then we all know, and the Gottman Institute talks about it too, I think 5 positives for every 1 negative. So when you put all of those efforts throughout, the months and years, they should be predominantly positive. And I think it's reflective in your overall satisfaction with the relationship. Unfortunately, as humans, we remember the 1 negative thing a lot easier. So you have to put a lot more positives into your relationship than negatives. So if you feel like it's overwhelming negative, obviously we're not psychologists or psychiatrists, and you can, get your own, it's always good to have someone to talk to if you feel like you're stuck. But change is not always easy, and you have to be very intentional, and you have to figure out where in your relationship can you put in these positive deposits. And any discussion around that, Kevin, or
just the deposits? Well, it was bugging me that I didn't remember what that thing was called, the reach outs. It's actually called a bid. They call it a bid.
Okay.
So when the spouse is actually presenting something, and these can be very, very smaller versus big. Hey, I need you to put out the garbage. That would be a necessarily small thing, but hey, how was your day? Is actually a small bid for interaction. And there's 3 ways they talk about responding to these big or small: is turning towards, in which case you're accepting and deepening the relationships. There's turning away, which is ignoring or missing it, which is actually detrimental. And then there's turning against, where you're rejecting that interaction. So it was bugging me because I hate it when I don't remember something.
It made me think of like when your parents say, "How was school today?" Fine.
Well, yeah, and that's true, right? That how to school. If you have if you're an unaware child, like most of us are, right? You're not recognized. That's a bid from your parents to actually interact and talk about what's going on in your life. We started this episode talking about kind of relationships, and I think I made the point about, well, we're talking about like interpersonal or more romantic or your significant other relationships. Relationships are relationships. In like most core things, the stuff that you learn is applicable in many different roles, whether it's at work, whether it's with your spouse, or with your kids. I will tell you, I use a lot of this stuff with my kids, and that small little bid thing comes up all the time. Like I do multiple bids with my kids. Sometimes they may not necessarily be responsive, but I will tell you, over time, if you're doing these small little things, they do model it. Mm-hmm. Or even with your spouse or significant other, recognizing what's important to them and performing those little actions around it does actually you start seeing this reciprocal kind of thing. Because what doesn't ever work is that turn away stuff. Like, well, you should just know, or criticism, or when they actually make a bid and then you're like, wow, you should have done this yesterday, kind of a thing. That just doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I think there's it's required to be aware that those are bids. Otherwise you can destruct the relationship you have. I mean, unless you're just doing all the right things. But if you're not aware, I highly doubt. You have to have a certain level of awareness. That's
or
a good.
Grew up in an amazing environment, right?
Yeah, like everyone's just doing the right thing all the time.
Yeah,
which is hard to find.
Well, well, that's a. I don't want to drag this one out too long, but it's just fascinating to me because even that's important, right? If you're really quote unquote good at something that comes naturally to you, if you're unaware of it, it makes it very difficult to improve, and it makes it really, really hard to teach it to somebody else, right? Other than through action, which is great, but sometimes you actually need to be a little bit more intentional about doing it. So we're coming full circus again. This is like, we should just call this the awareness podcast, because everything focuses on being aware, at least, being able to rise your head up and look around and see, so that you can then be really intentional in what those actions may be or not be.
So it's relationship awareness.
This is relationship awareness. Yeah.
Relationship Awareness Month.
Relationship
Black
awareness.
History Month too, but we're going to make it Relationship Awareness Month.
Yeah. Well, that's relationships, right? Black history is a relationship of different races and ethnicities in the United States or in the world, and being able to be aware that the people are treated differently, and that results in different experiences, and to be compassionate, at least, with that, or empathetic with that someone else's experience, rather than denying it, because there's a bid, right? Bid. Are we going to turn towards, or are we going to turn away, or are we going to violently reject it?
Oh, this ties so well. Like, I mean, literally our history is based on some very unhealthy relationships, because believe it or not, yes, despite the race difference that we are all human. I think there's so much psychology there. We could have a totally different episode with some specialist in that, but rejecting in whatever relationship it is in life, rejecting or not acknowledging the trauma, the bad things that have happened. That's not acknowledging it as a human being, and the complexities of how they interact. Their reality is different than the person that's not endured that. So that's a really good point.
Absolutely. But we can talk about all this stuff forever.
Yeah.
So maybe
well, I'm going to let you take us out.
All right. Well, thanks, folks, for joining us for another episode of the Change Physician podcast, where awareness again reared its little head. We were talking about relationships, and specifically, kind of just do a quick recap here. We talked about relationships in the 4 Horsemen, which comes out of the Gottman Institute. Those Horsemen being criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, which are behaviors which are detrimental and actually can be predictive in some ways of a relationship ending, or at least a unhelpful relationship. Being aware of them and aware of the small intentional steps that you can do, some of which were, focusing on actions, not words, being present in your encounters, saying yes to things because you're saying yes to the relationship, not necessarily to the yes for whatever it is that your spouse or significant other is asking you to, and really about creating moments of connection. Those can be small moments, those can be big moments, but really scheduling and creating and crafting those moments of connection are absolutely key. So with that, we will see you on the next episode. If you're interested in joining our community here and developing a relationship with us, you can go to thechangedphysician.com. And until next week, stay well.
Take care.